Hello. Welcome to Profitable Chats. Another episode, you guys. Yes, we're wearing the same clothes because this is our second episode in one day.
Back to back.
Kind of exciting. All right, this one. I forgot to say we have someone working on like a little intro video thing. And
thank you, Brent.
he's one of our friends. But so anyhow, hopefully that'll be coming soon. And that's an exciting piece of information. But all right now it's going to be another teaching. So it's a pretty powerful one. So hopefully you guys enjoy it.
This one is basically, who called you that?
Who called you that?
Who called you that? We know in the Word, and we've even talked about how words are, life and death, power in the tongue.
Yep.
Very important what you speak and all those things. And
it matters. It matters to positive or negative. But
yes, absolutely.
Go ahead.
There's power both ways.
Yes.
But we read in the Word, and so many times, Jesus would change somebody's name because he's changed their direction, changed their ministry, changed their calling.
And we've mentioned that before.
And yes.
Yeah.
And so it's important on what you're called. And I want to give a perspective from a prophet of how important that is.
Okay.
As an example, church we were going to in Michigan a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
Long time ago. Wow. Good thing we're not getting old.
No way.
And we started going there, and I'm going to use his name. Pastor Lee.
No. Okay, yes.
So went there, started going there, and really just loved the things going on there. And
the heart
and
of
his heart was right, and it was beautiful. And then the Lord started just showing me some shift, in some things and some direction and stuff like that. And he said, "You're no longer allowed to call him pastor." And it kind of took me back a little bit. And I'm like, why not? He's officially pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And he just said, "I'm no longer calling him that."
Oh.
So you're
the
not.
Lord himself.
The Lord said, "I'm not calling him that, so you're not allowed to call him that."
Oh.
And I'm like, first I was, it was early on in my walk as a prophet.
Right.
And I'm like, well, what does it really matter?
Yeah.
And I'm like, whether I call him this or I call him that, but the Lord said that, so from that point on, it was just first name only, and okay, and so that was kind of a thing to me, and then he calls us out of our hiding place and puts us at Authentic, and and we meet with Mac, Pastor Mac. Mm-hmm. And we're talking with him, and and you had asked him, what are your giftings and your callings? Mm-hmm. And he said, "Pastor, well, apostle." And immediately that rang true with me. I'm like, the Lord's like, he's an apostle.
Okay.
Said, okay. Like, that's pretty cool. Never been around an official apostle. Mm-hmm. People.
I never called a person an apostle.
Exactly.
Actually, I've never known an apostle. I don't think until now.
At least none that have been in their right position. There's a lot of pastors.
Okay.
We're going to talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
That
go ahead.
Are not pastors. They're something else. But and some weeks later, the Lord showed me that, that he's had Mac in the pastor position. That's where he's had him.
And he's good at it. I mean, he has a heart.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
God will equip you where he's got you.
Sure.
As long as he's the one that's got you there.
Of course.
Talk about that as well.
Point. Yeah.
But, he just showed me how he's had him in this position as a pastor, and he's been doing exactly what God's wanted him to do. But then he tells me that I'm no longer allowed to call him pastor. I'm like, again? He's like, you're calling him apostle because that's what I'm calling him. I'm like, okay.
So good.
And he usually tells me things ahead of time. So, a couple weeks later, I think it was on a Monday prayer night, the Lord said, "Go tell Mac, explain to him that you're not allowed to call him pastor because he's changing his position to apostle. And I'm like, okay, cool. And I, back in my relationship was new.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was kind of like, okay, sure, whatever.
Weirdo guy.
And then we had that week of prayer and that Friday prophetic night. And as I started to speak, the Lord said, change his name. So right there, I said, the Lord's changing your name. You're no longer pastor. You're Apostle Mac. He's elevated you. You're calling. And I think that kind of took him back a little bit too, because he's like, all these people know me as pastor, and how are they going to take this? But it was just nothing more than God's taking him to a rightful place. And so what I'm kind of getting at is the Lord showing me how important it is to call people properly. Yeah. It matters. Mm-hmm. So if he points that out to me, then I know it's important. If other people call him that or don't call him that, I don't think it's as important.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. But we get into, well, I read a book, a business book. Okay. You and I talked about it a while back, but
I did not read it.
I didn't read many business books, but where I was, they recommended, hey, this is a really good book, read it. I'm like, okay. Mm-hmm. And the book was called Good to Great. Mm-hmm. It was about taking companies, not just staying at good, but taking what makes a company go from good to great. A lot of companies are good, but what separated that difference? Mm-hmm. And in reading it, it was some of the same exact stuff that the Lord was already shown me in people being in the right position and things like that. So the book was about, one of the most important things is getting the right people in the right position. Use the illustration of, you get people on the bus, but then you got to get the people in the right seats on the bus to make everything go correctly. So, and it's that same way in the body. Okay. How many pastors do you know?
It seems like everybody's called pastor.
It's like if you've been to any kind of Bible school or whatever, pastor. You're in charge of the youth ministry, youth pastor. Okay, you're in charge of the women, you're women's pastor. They just slap pastor. And, it's fine if you're truly a pastor.
Sure.
But man does not make you a pastor. Mm-hmm. God's calling does. So we've called people that are supposed to be something else, and we've kept them from becoming what they're supposed to be because we slapped a title on them that holds them in this
title.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. And so, we need to. Well, here's a really good example. Back to that church with a pastor that I couldn't call pastor anymore.
Okay, in mission.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And, when we first got there, God had said, you're just going to serve. Mm-hmm. Great. So and that's all we did for years. Just we served any need, anything, anywhere. Mm-hmm. That's what God had us doing. And then God said, all right, I'm going to bring you out. It's time for you to start speaking some things and, doing some stuff. So I did what you're supposed to do. I went to the pastor who, you're under the pastor.
Sure.
And I said, God's bringing me out. It's time to speak. And, what I got was, well, you're not getting my pulpit, which obviously I'm like,
you didn't even want that.
My calling. That's not my gifting. That's not where I'm supposed to be. So
I'm not
I don't want it.
Yeah, or whatever.
And, but he said, well, maybe I'll put you with the youth and see how you do. And immediately God showed me that's like saying, you go out to spring training for baseball and the coach says, well, what do you do? So, well, I'm a pitcher. Great. Well, let's have you catch for a season. And if you do good catching, then we'll move you to a pitcher. I'm not called to be a catcher. I'm not equipped to be a catcher. I'm not designed to be a catcher. Mm-hmm. But that's what we do in the organized churches. You send them first, you throw them at the kids. And if you don't screw that up too much, well then, and you're controllable enough. Uh-oh. Yep, I'm going there because we got to be able to. The head pastor's got to be able to control everything. Yes, I'm speaking against it because that spirit of religion, I hate it. So does God. But it's a control thing, and if we can control you in this circumstance, then we can trust you to be controlled in this circumstance and on your way up. But I've got two issues with that, because first of all, you're supposed to find out what their gifting, what their calling is, and build them within help them find their true calling. That's what the FTC is supposed to do.
In that,
That's what the leadership is supposed to be doing, leading them in that, not, tossing them at different things and, go out and work in the parking lot.
Which working in the parking lot or working with children,
absolutely.
None of those are bad.
But if you're not equipped for it, if that's not your calling, if that's not your place, if that's not your purpose, and we're just sticking people we're not supposed to be, we're not doing them a service, and ultimately we're not doing the body a service, because they're not equipped to do this right, and somebody else could do it so much better. And you put them somewhere where they're supposed to be, and they're going to flourish. But we get people that aren't in their right position, and it's not fulfilling. It's not the passions in them, and they end up getting burnt out and leaving, because that's not it.
Ultimately, say, I don't know, whatever your real title is, but then you go into the children and you don't have a passion for that, you're really not imparting to the children what they need.
Absolutely.
And it's not your passion. So it gets old.
You get discouraged. You feel like you're failing because you're not doing it as well as this guy over here, who their heart and their passion is for that.
Super quickly, you brought up parking lot, and I think that's just a service thing. It doesn't matter what your calling is. You can be in a parking lot. I just wanted to say that.
I'm just saying we stick people places without actually finding out where they should go.
Right.
And things like that. So, but the other thing I want to point out about the kids that kind of really gets under my craw.
Under your craw.
However that is. It just, I'm just going to say it pisses me off.
Okay.
The children are not a practice area.
You're right.
Our children are the future. They are God's blessing. They are the power of tomorrow. And we should be throwing our best at the youth. Not our practice.
Right.
Not our, if you don't screw them up too much, then we'll bring you to adults.
Right.
No.
That's true.
We need to give the children our absolute best.
It's a good word.
We've seen some in our body that, wow, their heart is for kids. They connect and they draw them out, and they're just, it's there. And I'm like, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Pour into them, bring them into a spiritual fullness, and just, anyway, I just had to get that out there. So that's one thing that kind of bothers me. But the whole thing of, who called you that? And we got to find out, did God call you that, or did man call you that? If man called you that, toss it aside. Don't take that label. If I would have listened back then and tried to go for the youth, and that's not your calling. That's not
right.
Anybody that knows me knows that's just, I love kids. I love the youth. I love them. But that's not, my word that God gives me to speak is not for the youth. I'd be a duck out of water. And I would do my best, but I would have been discouraged. I wouldn't have grown in my gift at all.
Again, you wouldn't have been sharing with them what they need either.
Exactly. So I would be getting robbed of growing in my calling. They would be getting robbed and not getting poured into the way they needed to be.
Right.
And then the whole body as a whole wouldn't reap from them as they grew. It's so important to have the right people in the right position. And the right position is what their calling is, what their gifting is, what their heart pulls them to.
Yeah.
And
so what kind of names? Who called you that? So let's talk about.
Yeah. So it not only is it important to be, are you your pastor, your apostle, your prophet, your teacher, those things.
But also,
it goes beyond that to, we we've dealt with so many things with people slapping labels on people. It's just like, you're HD, ADHD. I don't know all the letters we're going to put on it, but we come up with something and we slap it on there and we stamp that label and
then
we call them that.
That person or child thinks that forever.
And it's spoken over them over and over. Did God call you that?
Right.
That's what you need to find out. Because if man just threw that label on you so that we could start speaking more death words over you, there's so many of those that,
but you're stupid.
You've dealt with, feeling like you're ugly for all your life. And I'm like, that's always blown my mind on how in the world you could feel that way. And I, to this day, I still, other than I know that ugly things have been spoken over you.
You're right.
All your life. And they've been stamped that. And so it comes down to who called you that? Man did. What did God call you?
I'm the apple of his eye.
Absolutely you are. And
I'm his creation. And he don't make no junk, people say.
Absolutely. I love it. But, we just need to start looking at who called you that. And just when you start having those voices in your head say, well, man, I'm stupid.
Yeah.
Who called you that?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a word God spoke over you? Is that what God says? If it's not, take it captive, reject it, focus on what God has called you.
Yeah.
And
then in return, we need to call people what they are.
Absolutely. Yes.
And we need to be careful not to be. Yeah. Look at us.
Yep. And we need to be very careful and listen what God has called them. And, he's had me start speaking over and above to people. I'll be talking to a friend. I'll just shoot him a text and it's like, hey, man of God.
I do that
because
too.
That's what they are. Hey, anointed one. The world says it's silly, but that means it's wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And speak those things. We speak things over each other, just like we talked about in the our words are so powerful.
Right.
We've got to call people what God calls them. We got to see them how God sees them. We need to speak to them how God speaks to them.
Because it matters to their heart.
It does.
It matters to our hearts. It matters to their heart.
And so whether it's in the middle of the body, I can no longer call Mac Pastor Mac because he's an apostle. And so if I try to call him a Pastor Mac, I'm trying to hold him down from where God's calling him. And so I need to speak him up to where God's calling him. And, and we need to be careful and really look at, as leadership, not just slapping pastor on this one and pastor on that one, and instead find out what has God called them. And line ourselves with God and what God's calling them instead of what man's doing.
It's interesting because there are some things that I learned as a child. Raised in the types of churches that I went to that I don't love, and I don't think they're right even now. But one of the things is we didn't say pastor and stuff when I was a kid. Yeah. It's brother so-and-so. And that one is true. That is something that was right at churches where I grew up because they are brothers and sisters. I appreciate that. And I didn't recognize that I appreciated that until this conversation. So anyway.
It's important.
It is.
God says it's important. So we need to make it important.
Right.
So.
Yeah. He called people by the right name.
He did.
Yeah.
And if man called them the wrong name, he changed it.
It's true.
Before he put them in their right calling, he changed their name and started calling them what their calling was.
Right. Yes, he did. Several times over that happened throughout the Bible.
Because Because I can tell you, if it was spoken over me, pastor, all my life and all my ministry time or whatever you want to call it, I would never have walked into what my true calling was.
Right.
I would have still had some of that gifting that was flubbing up this.
Okay, yeah.
Because this isn't this. So it's important. So that's why we had to talk about it today.
That's why we had to talk about it.
Hope you enjoyed it.
Who called you that?
Exactly. And
are you living up to what you should be? What your true calling is, whether in name or job, gifting.
Yep.
Anyway, gosh, we love you guys. We hope you have a great day. Please like, subscribe. I feel so silly saying all that, but we want you to like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, tell us your opinion, whatever it is. We want to hear it. We want to hear from you.
And I send out the video to a lot of people because it's new and it's starting up. But I'm going to stop sending them out and just assume that if you want to keep getting them, you're subscribing. If you don't, then I won't send them to you. So just if you want it all, subscribe and you'll get it.
That's good to know. All right, you guys have a great night. We'll see you next time.